Hi, it's Dr. Crone. In this video, we'll explore the topic of revolutions. On this slide, you can see a comparative politics definition of the term revolution. A revolution in this definition has to involve the overthrow of an established political order with a transfer of power from one type of government to another. There are many ordinary uses of the term revolution that don't fit this academic definition. I'm thinking of Bernie Sanders saying he is leading a, quote, revolution. Electing a new leader with new policy ideas, even when they're very different from previous ones, does not qualify as a revolution. Sanders is proposing change within existing political institutions, not the overthrow of them. Political scientists look for three qualities that define a revolution and make it different than other types of social conflict and contention. As we mentioned in the previous slide, the goal of a true revolution is the transformation of the political and social order, rather than just changes in leadership or policy definition or policy direction. A true revolution also must have a strong mass component. We'll explore mere elite-driven change, such as a coup d'etat, in the next video in the series. Finally, a true revolution is almost always accomplished by violence, usually war, or at least the threat of imminent violence. Otherwise, we would call it a social movement, which we will also address in the next video. As you can see, here we're talking about revolution, and that's a very extreme form of contention in a society. Political scientists talk about two different types of revolution, the social revolution and the political revolution. Social revolutions are rare. They involve not only a change in political institutions, but also a major change in the social and economic structures of the country. For example, the French, Russian, and Chinese revolutions all involved a huge change in the class structure of the country, where the ruling elite aristocracy was replaced by a more egalitarian economic structure. The other type of revolution, which is more common, is a political revolution. In political revolutions, we do see major change in the political institutions of the society, often going from a more authoritarian to a more democratic situation. But we don't see major change in the social or economic structures. For example, the American Revolution created major political change with a brand new set of institutions of government. But there was no real change in social class or the economic structure of the country. Slavery remained, only upper social classes could vote and participate politically, and the basic economic structure of agrarian and industrializing capitalism remained the same. Many comparative political scientists have tried to understand the conditions that lead to revolution. The progression I'll show you here is one commonly agreed upon scenario that seems to happen in many lead-ups to social or political revolution. First, a weak or fragile state can't provide for its population. That society experiences high levels of economic deprivation, which leads to the rise of social movements and social unrest. At this point, the weak state often intervenes to attempt to solve the problem, but if it fails, and a lot of people would say when it fails, revolution will often occur. The political scientist James Davies developed a theory called the J-curve that helps explain a puzzling aspect of the previous slide's progression. So, political scientists have understood that we cannot predict when a revolution would happen simply by analyzing absolute levels of poverty or absolute levels of government repression. Davies identifies a more important concept called relative deprivation, which he defines as the gap between what the public desires and what the state provides. According to Davies, when the gap between this is tolerable to the public, they won't revolt. But when it becomes intolerable, they are more likely to. The J-curve, which you can see in the chart on the right, explains that when a state is trying to deal with mass unrest, they will introduce reforms. And you can see those reforms happening here. As time goes on, the needs of the public grow, and the state responds to those needs by creating reforms. There's still a gap between needs and expectation, or between needs or expectations and the actual satisfaction of those needs. But what Davies would say is this measure, which we can't really measure in societies, this gap right here is what we would call a tolerable gap. But what happens is when the reforms work, the public responds to those not by being satisfied and leveling off their needs as they would if, for example, the line started to move this way, but rather when a society faces reforms, the public responds by demanding more change. You can think of a place of a very repressive government and imagine that economically, the government decides to provide, let's say in a timely way, let's say they decide to provide a major boost to the economy and to the people by giving everybody a certain amount of money. So the government distributes some money. The public has been saying, we need more money, we don't have enough, we're dying of poverty here. The government responds by creating a national income or something like that. And what may happen, or often does happen, is that will just raise the public's expectations of more government reform. Not that they would necessarily say we need more money, but they might say something like, well, that's fine, but how about a guaranteed job now? Or how about free public education now? And as those needs keep going up and up in response to reforms, at some point the government stops being willing to or able to change. And at that point, there becomes what Davies would say is an intolerable gap. And actually, where you see this need satisfaction dropping off, often what happens here in this part of the J is that the government will start repressing or cracking down or taking away some of the reforms that it's already had because it sees that it's leading to problems. We often see this in authoritarian governments that give more and more civil liberties and then get to a point where they say we can't give any more civil liberties and we're actually going to take some of those away. Then the gap becomes what Davies calls intolerable, and an intolerable gap between need and the satisfaction of the need is what leads to, in Davies' point, revolution. For the discussion board this week, one of your tasks is to apply the case study of the French Revolution to the concepts from the video. Check the syllabus for the correct page numbers for the reading assignment for that case study. Then be sure to post a thoughtful reflection to this prompt. How does the reading tie into the concepts presented in the video? Do not just copy someone else's ideas. If someone else has already posted one of your ideas, then acknowledge that and build on it in your comments by adding new ideas and content. Or you can find a different connection to post. For additional information on what led up to the revolution and what happened afterward, you can see the historical development section of the France study in the back of the textbook. That might give you more fodder for your post. That's all for this video. Be sure you view the other video in the unit before posting to the discussion board, and have a great week.